Hello. Hello. Welcome. Hey, listen, if anybody needs sort of hearing, something to help your hearing, we have them in the back. So if you want to get that to help you with the hearing, it's there. So welcome. My name is Ty Sidgley. I'm the Executive Director of Common Ground, and I'd like to welcome the Hamilton community, the local community who comes as well, and those zooming in. Remember, please, if you're to silence your cell phone if you haven't done that. So this is our fourth Common Ground of the semester, our ninth of the year. Climate, guns, borders, and beyond. How do we tackle today's biggest issues? We are very excited to welcome Representative Matt Cartwright, Hamilton class of 1983. Now, I told him we weren't going to do the wave this time, but we might the next time he comes. He is a Democratic representative from Pennsylvania, and former Representative Steve Russell, Republican from Oklahoma. And we give you, yes, right. Common Ground's mission is to explore cross-boundary political thought and complex social issues. We bring highly respected thought leaders to the Hamilton campus to participate in small classroom dialogues, which we did today, and large event discussions. Topics intertwined with the college's curriculum are chosen to foster critical thinking and holistic examination of difficult and often contentious national and global policy issues. I want to thank our Common Ground team, Assistant Director Katie Stewart, and our Program Assistant Kim Ritchie, and our student ambassadors, if you would raise your hands. Student ambassadors, where are you? Thank you. There you are in the back. So we're very excited. Our student ambassadors leave on a trip Thursday to our nation's capital, and thanks to Representative Cartwright, who has set up a tour of the Capitol for them. And also our partners at the Bipartisan Policy Center, who will host our students. I'm very grateful to Mary Helen and Robert Morris, Eve Niquette and Charles Pohl, and Lori and David Hess. Their support for Common Ground is indispensable. And let me plug our next event, which is next Wednesday, the 10th of April, with the Bipartisan Policy Center. Steve Scully from the BPC will bring his Sirius XM radio show, POTUS show, to campus again. And the 7:30 event will be State of the Race, Biden versus Trump and the road to the White House. We will discuss the state of the presidential election with a Republican and a Democratic strategist. Now it's my honor to introduce our moderator, Mimi Geerges. She is an experienced TV and radio news on-air host. On C-SPAN, she hosts the Washington Journal, a DC institution, which provides a forum for lawmakers and journalists to discuss key topics surrounding today's legislation. For 16 years, she hosted the Mimi Geerges show on PBS and Sirius XM. We wanted to ensure that we had a professional as a moderator, and we feel lucky to have found the best. We're pleased to welcome Mimi to Hamilton. So please join me in welcoming Representative Matt Cartwright, Representative Steve Russell, and moderator Mimi Geerges.
Well, thank you, Ty, and thank you to all of you for coming and for having me. I'm really excited to be with you all here. I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we'll get started in our topic. Congressman Matt Cartwright represented Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District since 2013. He's a strong believer in working with members of both political parties. He's authored and passed 16 substantive bills into law, signed and enacted by the last 3 presidents, a history degree from Hamilton College, and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law. Former Congressman Steve Russell is the president and CEO of JARS. It's an organization focused on spreading God's word. He served as an infantryman in the Army, turning down a promotion to colonel to settle down in Oklahoma and move into politics. He then served as a Republican U.S. representative from Oklahoma from 2015 to 2019, and in the Oklahoma State Senate from 2009 to 2013. Welcome to both of you. Before we get into our topics, you guys served in Congress for 4 years. Matt, tell us what was your relationship like? How did you guys get along?
Well, I got elected to Congress before Steve. I got elected in 2012. I had done courtroom jury trial work for 25 years, and I was up for something new. I ran for Congress, and be careful what you wish for. I won, and served one term, and then Steve came in 2014 elections. You remember when we were going to ban Muslims from coming to this country? We were. I think it was 2017. And that was, the word went out, and all of the Republican faithful in the House lined up with that. And there was this one guy, I was there on the floor of the House, Mimi. There was this one guy that went into the well of the House where you make speeches from, and he walks right up to the podium. And this guy, in kind of a drawl, gives this impassioned speech about religious freedom and tolerance in this country, and this is what this country was built on. We have a statue of Thomas Jefferson right outside our hallowed hall in the House of Representatives. He went on and on about that, and about his career, about how he had been an Army Ranger, came out as a lieutenant colonel, served 25 years as an Army Ranger, tours in Bosnia, in Iraq, and Afghanistan. That was Steve Russell. He's got the combat infantryman's badge on. Whenever you see that, it's a long blue rectangle with a silver rifle on it. Thank anybody who wears that badge. They've been shot at with live rounds for your freedom. He gave that speech, and I said, you know how your parents taught you, pick your friends, don't let them pick you? I said, I picked that guy. He's going to be my friend, he doesn't know it yet. And because I thought, here's a guy that's been shot at with live rounds, and he is not particularly afraid of Paul Ryan. And he wasn't. And he got up and he did that, and I made it my business to get to know him, and we worked on bills together, and we passed a wonderful bill called the Megabyte Act. The government has been saving over $1 billion a year on software purchases because of a bill we did together in 2017. I couldn't be prouder to be friendly with this man. He is all wet on quite a wide range of political issues, you have to understand.
So let's get into that, Matt.
Yeah.
And let's start with gun control.
Sure.
Steve, you have said we should really tackle people rather than guns. Matt, you've gotten an F grade from the NRA, so you're completely unredeemable in their eyes. So let's go through a couple of proposals that have been out there, and you guys can kind of talk about. First, I want to start with the ban on assault rifles. There was a ban in a 10-year period between 1994 and 2004. Mass shooting deaths did go down. So Steve, I'll start with you. Do you agree with an assault rifle ban?
No, I really don't. I'll give you a couple of prepared things here on the issue. According to the CDC, homicides are still considerably lower at 7.3 per 100,000 than the 10 plus per 100,000 in the 1980s. So while it's true that gun violence went down during that period, it still continues to decline. Even with the higher publicity, the rates are actually decreasing from even 2021 till now. Second quarter 2023, the last statistical year. People love to target rifles, and in particular, intimidating looking rifles, as an epidemic that needs to be addressed for public safety. According to the FBI, 364 people were killed by rifles of any kind in 2019, the last statistical year available. By comparison, and rounding for simplicity, 1,500 were killed by knives, 400 were killed by hammers and clubs, 600 by fists and feet. No one is suggesting that we ban steak knives, hammers, or amputate limbs, yet all of those killed more people than rifles that are being targeted. How we portray a problem often will shape our view. And while any innocent loss of life at the hands of murderers and criminals is immoral, unlawful, and tragic, we cannot let the visceral feelings we hold when we see those injustices skew the understanding of the nature of the problem. For example, if automobiles were only reported in the news as harmful, then we would have an outside view of the hazards of driving and a phobia to get out on the roads in the interest of public safety. But according to the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, nearly 43,000 people died in automobile accidents. Put another way, that's 43,000 die each year, roughly, 300 murdered by rifles. That's a 1 to 20 ratio, yet you and I will drive today tomorrow, and hopefully until the day we die. And hopefully it's not by a car or a rifle.
But Steve, the primary purpose of a car is transportation.
Sure.
The primary purpose of a gun is to kill somebody.
Not necessarily. In fact, the bigger issue is it's not an outsized, uncontrollable public safety hazard from intimidating firearms. The issue is the Constitution of the Republic. Let me explain. The framers and founders knew that rights were inherent, inalienable. They're not granted by government. They are inalienable. They are God-given as they stated it. Government can't take them away because government doesn't grant these moral rights. The rights to free speech, to freely and publicly worship according to one's conscience. The rights to property, to have your property not seized by government soldiers. And we know the Bill of Rights, but the one right that was pretty important, the inalienable right to self-defense, listed second only in importance to the expression of the first. Alexander Hamilton, you guys might know him, he said, self-preservation is the first principle of our nature. He also explained, the best we can hope for concerning the people at large is that they be properly armed. When the framers wrote the Constitution and debated the Bill of Rights, they clearly defined and stated that the militia is all the American people, the people at large.
But I'm going to interrupt you, Steve. There were no assault rifles when the Second Amendment was written.
Okay.
So just on the assault rifle ban.
You bet. In
Not
fact,
not on the Second Amendment as a
happy
whole.
to explain it. They mentioned specifically to be able to keep and bear arms personally, not in armories, not where the government would put safeguards over them. They understood that these same implements could be used by the common people for common defense, right? Meaning that the types of arms were suitable for that purpose, even being militarily suitable to stand, if necessary, in the musket line with your neighbors. A well-trained and regulated fashion, not necessarily militia being government troops, but the common people for the common welfare and the common defense. Hamilton explained it also this way. A standing army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people while there is a large body of citizens, a little if at all inferior to the military, in use of the arms. They also understood that the creator they reference inherently created life with mechanisms of defense, whether claws, fangs, quills, beaks, odors, poisons, or in the case of human beings, our hands coupled with our intelligence to fashion implements to extend and defend ourselves, our families and our nations. And on that, in closing, on that basis, no law was to be made and this right shall not be infringed. It was interesting in 1934, after the National Firearms Act was passed, there was an actual case that went all the way to the Supreme Court where a man tried to claim that a sawed-off firearm was his constitutional right to bear. And the Supreme Court struck it down because they said it was not useful for military purposes in the defense of the nation as common people. They understood it then. We've forgotten it now.
Matt, what do you think? Assault rifle ban, let's stick with that for now.
Sure. I should explain that I am a gun owner. I'm a hunter, and I'll tell you, I have a Remington 700. It's a deer rifle, 243 Winchester caliber rimfire. From 100 yards, I can put, it has a magazine of 4 rounds. I can put all 4 rounds inside the diameter of a silver dollar. And my son Matty's even better. That boy could shoot the eyelash off of a gnat. But I am not interested in taking guns away from responsible gun owners. That's not what I'm about. But I want to tell you, when I first got elected to Congress, and Steve went through this too, you go through orientation. And I'm up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Harvard, the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and we're listening to a lecture from an erudite scholar, and the lady sitting next to me, her cell phone goes off, just buzzed. She takes the call, red-haired lady. She came in with me in the class of 2012, and she listens to this call, and Mimi, the blood drained out of her face. She was aghast. She was really, really ashen and upset. And she had to excuse herself. She got up and she left. She all discombobulated. It was Elizabeth Esty. and she had Sandy Hook, Connecticut in her district. 20 little kids just got mowed down in a space of about 5 minutes, plus another 6 or 7 adults, by somebody that shouldn't have had access to a firearm of that capability. My idea is this: if we can't come together and do something to prevent tragedies like that, if we can't change things a little bit in this country, shame on us. And I think people who honor responsible gun ownership and use ought to be able to agree on that.
But where's the responsibility of how we fashion our entertainment industry, or how we glorify violence and killing, how we don't address the problem that goes behind the shooter rather than the implement itself? And yet we don't invest hardly any type of study on those issues. We don't invest any type of responsibility, because we will wrap that in the First Amendment and say, well, that is protected speech, that is protected expression. But yet where is the responsibility there to address the people side of the issue rather than the implement side of the issue? You can't have it both ways. You have to address those problems. And what we find is that many of these shooters, there were signs, there were ways, there were factors that you could identify rather than demonizing the implement itself.
Which leads me to red flag laws, right? So as a reminder, red flag laws mean that law enforcement can petition a court and take somebody's guns away that the court deems is a danger to himself or to other people. What do you think about that specifically, Steve?
There has to be really good evidence that would follow the rule of law. We as a republic, a representative republic, are nothing if we're not a nation of laws. It can't just be that government would come in and decide that you're guilty. Our Bill of Rights protects us against that, your property. So you have to address the Fourth Amendment, and you have to address the property issues. And that has to be done with proper evidence before a proper court of law before you do that search. We can't violate the First or the Fourth to castigate the Second. If we pull any one of these amendments out of our inalienable rights, not granted by government, they can't be taken away by government. So what do? You have to use them in combination, and you have to address them in combination, or we stand to lose them all.
Matt?
Look, we've had mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. There's just no denying it. It's happening. We need to do something about it. I'm very proud to serve, as proud as I am of Steve for having that combat infantryman's badge. I'm also proud of my friend Mike Thompson from California, who wears the same badge and served in Vietnam. And he is the chair of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and I'm proud to serve on that task force. And there are things we can do to cut. Now, it's so easy to point to one shooting and say, well, if you banned assault rifles, that wouldn't have had any effect because that wasn't an assault rifle. Or it's so easy to say, well, in that case, he could have used a knife, so let's not make any changes to the laws. We need to make changes. End of story. What is happening in this country is unacceptable, and we shouldn't have to wait till it happens to somebody in our family.
What do you think of that, Steve?
Well, I think that you have to, again, look at things comprehensively. And if you assault the Second Amendment, you better be prepared to defend the First, the Fourth, Seventh, all of the others, because those rights then become at risk.
Does universal background checks work for the amendments and the rights
So let me give you
of
some
individuals?
background. I founded a rifle business that made functioning replicas of Iraqi firearms illegal to own. I understand what the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms call-ins, the forms that you do for the call-ins and all of that. I was probably one of the few serving members of Congress that actually called for people's background checks when they would come in to purchase a firearm. I did that as a business owner and as a manufacturer. The systems do work, but yet they're not properly funded. You had cases, even in these mass shootings, where given a window of time, had the law enforcement been able to act, then you would have had a court of law that would have been alerted, you would have had a proper warrant and a proper search. So we have good procedures, but they've got to be funded. And if we don't fund them and if we don't support them, then, they ought to make a law to stop murder and maybe it'll stop. Oh, wait, we have laws against murder and people still do it. So you have to be able to enforce the things and fund the things that are going to address other than the implement. It's easy to target the implement, but that doesn't deal with the psychological issues, that doesn't deal with the personal issues, that doesn't deal with the law enforcement constraints. All of those things have to be worked in combination, and we have to keep the Bill of Rights in mind before we tinker with any of them.
Matt, last word on this topic.
Yeah, I would be remiss here in Clinton, New York, not to mention that my Remington rifle was made in Ilion, New York, not very far from here, and that was a company founded by somebody like Steve Russell, somebody that liked to make guns. His name was Eliphalet Remington II. He came down from Herkimer County to Utica and opened a factory. Now, he didn't make guns right away, but it was 1816. He opens a factory, and he made the barrels for rifles. The singular feature about rifles is the barrel, because there's rifling inside, and it makes the shooting much, much more accurate. And it's something to be proud of, and it's part of American culture that we have firearms and we understand how to use them, we understand how to keep them safe. I'm not for taking firearms away from responsible gun owners, but we have to do something different, because when we have mass shooting after mass shooting, it has to stop, and we have to try something different. We can do it while we still honor the innovation and the kind of the American culture of guns. While we honor, we can do that while we honor that, and also while we honor the Second Amendment. We can make changes consistent with both of those things if we put our heads together and get it done.
Let's talk about climate change. The globe is warming. Most scientists believe it's because of human activity. The question is, what should the federal government do about it? And I'll start with Matt on this question.
Sure. When I first got, the needle has moved a lot on this since I got to Congress. I got to Congress in January of 2013. At that time, it was verboten, utterly forbidden for Republicans to mention global warming or climate change. Nobody did it. You could tell they were going to get in trouble with the caucus chair if they talked about it. And they never did. Democrats were the only ones talking about it. But over time, it became just undeniable about the fact of climate change, the fact of extreme weather events caused by climate change and global warming. And all of a sudden, something started up called the Climate Solutions Caucus. And this was started up by Carlos Curbelo. You remember Carlos? He was a Republican who represented the Florida Keys in his congressional district. Makes sense, right? So he would be concerned about rising sea levels in the Florida Keys. And you had to join with a Democrat had to find a Republican to join the Climate Solutions Caucus. I did that. To be sure, they didn't have any really meaty ideas, solutions to climate change, but it was a step. Okay, the needle was moving. They could at least talk about it. What I'm very proud to tell you is that I am a vice chair of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition Caucus, the SEEK Caucus, in Congress. Right down the road in the Capital Region is Congressman Paul Tonko, and he's one of the co-chairs of that. When I first started in Congress, we had 43 members. I kind of unofficially became the Rush Chair for the SEEK Caucus, and I'm proud to say that we've built that up to 96 members of Congress now, the people that care about fighting that war on climate change and global warming.
So give me specifics. Funding is not unlimited. Where do limited funds go to fight global warming?
I couldn't be prouder about what we did with the Inflation Reduction Act, and that included in it more money than any government on the face of the planet has ever put into fighting climate change, because of all of the money going into revamping the electrical grid, into promoting the use of renewable energy, into into putting recharging stations everywhere. Places like this, you know, they have range anxiety, right? Rural places. You don't have that in Washington, but
We can't get anywhere in Washington. No range.
Walk.
But the IRA did so much, and we did it, and we can continue to do it. It doesn't have to be punitive. It doesn't have to hurt people. Don't be scared. Don't fall into the trap of believing this is going to hurt me and my family if we engage in the war on climate change. Because you know what? America has to lead. America has to be at the forefront of this fight. We know how to lead in this world. We can lead in the fight against climate change, and we've already started it. I couldn't be prouder that we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which there's a terrible name for that because it has so many different things in that bill, but the big meat of what's in that bill is fighting climate change.
What do you think, Steve?
So I'll take 2 minutes to ask some questions, okay? Because if you get to common ground, you got to have common interests, and I think there are some. Any attempts to exhibit good stewardship within the creation that God has provided will inevitably affect people's livelihood. The question we have to ask is, can we promote good environment and good economy? Until we believe that the answer to that is yes, we'll never get to any common ground. You will have ideologues on one side and industrialists on the other, and the two will never meet. It's only when we can convince the ideologues that human life is precious and worthy of advancement and flourishing, and then convince the industrialists that there is profitable economy and good stewardship in care of the environment. Absent that type of cooperation, I don't see major advancements being made. The innovators are the industrialists, and they have the capital to invest in innovation. The ideologues are the data collectors that can apply their knowledge to innovations to have the right type of solutions for the problem. So we need each other. Another question, do we control the climate or must we adapt to it? If we think we control the climate, we're already doomed to have a very negative outcome. We foolishly think that we can control the climate and the earth. That is the absolute arrogance of mankind. We cannot control the climate of the earth. That's God's domain. What we can do is adapt to the necessity of good stewardship. And we don't adapt by going primitive. And that would mean literally billions of people die. If the United States goes primitive, then we no longer provide $50 to $70 billion a year in foreign aid that helps keep billions out of poverty or famine. We can't go primitive. What we do instead, and I agree with Matt, is that we adapt with ways that we've always done by innovation, technology, and discovery of new ways to use the incredible resources that God has provided on our planet. Another question, what about the general welfare of society? We must have abundant energy to have good health care. We're not talking something abstract. We have to have good food supply and good food storage, good lighting, good heating, good cooling. We're not talking GDP numbers and a theoretical comparison of economy. We're talking real people. And we are talking about their lives. How do we manage the displacement of people's lives and jobs if one sector of our economy is immediately shut down in favor of another not yet capable of providing a standard of living and healthcare and food supply that we expect? How do we make enforceable progress without a heavy burden on the poor? Wealthy people find ways to afford alternatives. They can afford it. Laying heavy burdens on people, in essence, taxes the poor who can't afford Teslas, solar panels, windmills, or carbon offsets. Any good progress will be overthrown by the people if they see no way out of the predicament, and they will find tyrants that will be willing to give them what they want so that they can acquire power, and that's a danger that we must guard against. Better to find the common ground and build the transition by good innovation in economics. Even poor people find ways today to use cell phones and internet, but it's affordable. And it became affordable through innovation. So let's make an innovation. And then the last thing, what do we do when bad actors don't want to play? How do we influence the worst offenders on the globe with regard to carbon footprint while not diminishing our own capacity and standing in the world's economy? The most green societies on the planet are also, unfortunately, the most wealthy. You have to have lots of capital to get there. And when you're poor, cold, naked, and hungry, you don't really care about the coal or the haze or the fuel if it keeps you warm, protects your family, and protects your small industry. So when you view the United States and Western countries with disdain, you will take advantage of their curtailment and you force your position on the world stage.
So there's several
got-
things there.
You've got realities, though, that you have to address. And we can find common ground on nearly all of those issues, but you have to take them in total. You need the industrialists and the innovators, and you need those that can inform.
We will touch on all of that, but I want to ask you first to clarify, what do you mean by the US going primitive?
So there are some that advocate, Mimi, that we should curtail our lifestyle and the way that we do things, and we should go off the grid to be responsible for the planet. But what we find is that you need energy to have good things like healthcare, food supply, jobs, industry. You have to have all of those things, and that requires an abundance of energy.
Matt, Steve said we can't control the climate. Do you agree with that?
I don't. I think we are controlling the climate, and human activity is causing climate change. And I think that the great vast majority of scientists agree with that statement, and to scoff at the scientists is to tempt fate. And I say, look, this whole lecture series is called Common Ground, okay? And you think, well, what are you talking about? We're just up here disagreeing about things. But you heard him say it. You heard him say innovation is the way out. And I believe that too.
Yeah, I do too.
It absolutely is. And things like, gosh, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody could have imagined driving around electric cars. They would have envisioned, golf carts and scoffed at the whole idea. We're getting there, and we can move faster, and we can be a leader. And Steve's right, we have to worry about the bad actors.
I did want to ask you about that, because a big bad actor is China. They are the world's largest emitter of carbon.
50% more than the United States.
Right.
They're not incentivized to do something about the climate.
A big problem is that they are not a democracy, and so what the will of the people does not control what happens in China, and that's a problem, probably a bigger problem that we can solve tonight. But if you think about it, they're choking their people with fumes from burning coal. They're building coal plant after coal plant. I think this is where American leadership comes into it. American leadership can show the world that this can work. Renewable energy is available. It doesn't stop. We're working on better storage techniques. I think that revamping the grid is hugely important, but we have to show the world that this can be done, and it's going to improve the standard of living of the people living in the world when you work with renewable energy and you figure out how to transmit it and how to live with it without reducing your standard of living.
But you got to make it transitional as well. When we went from water and wind to steam, and when we transition from steam 100 years later to internal combustion, you have to transition it. You don't eliminate the one and castigate the other.
You feel like things are going too fast?
Not necessarily, but I think we demonize things that would be better use of carbon-based fuel like natural gas. It's much cleaner. We have 4 quadrillion cubic feet of it. I don't know how much a quadrillion is, but the United States has 4 of them. And that is enough to power the entire globe for nearly 300 years with natural gas. But when we demonize that and we say, well, that's carbon-based fuel, it is much more efficient and much lower footprint. So let's use some of that for transition so that we can get to the innovation and we can get to the economy. But when you absolutely eliminate one sector in favor of pushing the other, that affects people's lives.
No, and I can't argue with that, Mimi. It's you have to be practical. Now, one I mentioned storage of electricity. We need big storage units, and hydrogen is turning out to be an area of big interest there. You know how you create hydrogen? You electrolyze water, and the oxygen gets away, and you're left with the hydrogen, and you can burn that anytime you want and turn turbines. And what's the byproduct when you burn hydrogen? Water again. So
Potable water.
So these are wonderful ways to store energy. And here's the thing. Those electrodes that you stick in the water to ionize them and turn it into hydrogen, they're agnostic about where they get the energy. It can come from burning shale gas? It sure can. Or it could come from renewable sources like wind and solar. And so that's why I kind of like it, because it's a convertible way of storing energy. You can start with natural gas, and then when you've ramped up the production of renewable energy to the point where you don't need the natural gas anymore, you can use that.
I want to talk now about the role of religion in politics. It was just Easter this past weekend, and you're both strong men of faith. Mike Johnson, who was, when he was newly elected Speaker of the House, said this in an interview and asked about his views on issues. He said, quote, "Well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview." Steve, I want to start with you about how appropriate do you think that is? How much religion should be in public life and in politics?
Well, it was the First Amendment. So the framers and the founders thought it was pretty important. And I think, to quote Hamilton again, he said, "I have a tender reliance on the mercy of the Almighty through the merits of the Lord Jesus Christ. I am a sinner. I look to him for mercy. Pray for me." I would echo all of those words. And he says, "Remember, civil and religious liberty always go together. If the foundation of the one be sapped, the other will fall, of course." And so you might hear people make flippant comments and say, well, you can't legislate morality. Nonsense. Everyone legislates some view of morality. It's either theirs or somebody else's. And so Hamilton was right. You can't have civility absent of expression of faith. And the framers understood that, and they made it a center point. It's not the freedom to think or the freedom to, pray on your own. No, it's the freedom to freely express your faith. And that has been a hallmark of the United States from our very founding. And we have to maintain that. And it is why I got up on the House floor and I like, hey, if you've got Syrian refugees that are trying to flee ISIS and be alive, and we can't accommodate them and bring them here, shame on us. We shouldn't be afraid of being good-natured.
But how do people use the same exact text of the Holy Bible and come to such different results
It usually
and such
is
different policies?
Based upon pride of life. When people are proud and arrogant and they're unwilling to accommodate and be kind, then they'll be hateful and rude and they'll justify it and be smug about it. But that doesn't mean it's right.
Matt, your thoughts?
This is why I'm friends with this guy. And I was there when he gave that speech, and it made a deep impression on me. Sure, it's all right to talk about religion. Just don't exclude anybody's religion and honor what our founding fathers put together, including Alexander Hamilton. A place called America where everyone's free to worship in the way they want and as much as they want, or not to if they don't want to. And it's so important. You know this, Mimi. Down in Washington, it seems like all we ever do is fight. All we ever do is fight. Everything's hyper-partisanship 24/7. That's not true. And not to come down on you, Mimi, or your Confederates, but the press overblows that. Why did they overblow it? Think about it. Why? All right. Did you ever read an article where the headline was, "The Democrats and the Republicans are all getting along swell this week"?
Or passed bipartisan legislation.
Or passed bipartisan legislation.
But really, Matt, is that really happening?
Yes, it is. I'm telling you, I passed.
In the House.
You read my bio, and I'm very proud of the fact that I passed 16 substantive bills into law. You can't do that if it's just one party. I'll give you an example. I wrote the Camp Lejeune Justice Act to correct a horrible stain on the integrity of the United States. All of these Marines and Marine families that were poisoned by well water couldn't even have a day in court. We fixed that, and I got 55 Republican co-sponsors in the House for that bill. And this is part of the craft of doing legislation, is making it your business to make friends across the aisle, to see past our differences, and to kind of compartmentalize in areas where he's all wet. And there's a lot of areas where he's all wet. But to look past those things and find the common ground, that's why Ty Sedgwill, I honor you for coming up with this wonderful lecture series. We have to do that, and we have to make sure people know it's happening even now. It's just that you can't sell beer with headlines like that. They're all getting along this week. Right? It's
Well,
not the business
can't-
model of the press, and there's also some performance artists down there in Washington.
I would agree with that.
who
Okay,
get-
but I'm going to push back on you.
Okay.
Because there's an Axios headline from last November that says this: lawmakers are ditching Congress at a record pace, and many of those are citing, quote, bitter partisanship as the reason that they are exiting Congress.
I think there's some truth to that. I don't think it's, it's all encompassing, but there's a kernel of truth to that. I think there are people who are leaving Congress right now because they're really upset about the dysfunction. And there is a dysfunction going on right now, that we have a Republican House that it's all they can do just to keep the lights on in the government. Because there's a faction of, 30 or 40 Freedom Caucus members who are bound and determined to shut the government down. People who thought it was a good idea to shut the government down in 2013 for 20 days, and who were in a high state of outrage when they found out that meat inspectors couldn't go perform their USDA duty, and so they had to throw out meat from slaughterhouses because it couldn't be inspected. These are people who don't really understand what the government does, and I suggest that they shouldn't have run for office until they figured that out.
Well, and I think the key factor in anything where you have sharp partisanship in how you get to common ground, you can't negotiate on position. You can't. If Matt and I hold diametrically opposed positions, and we do on many areas, but we also have many that we agree on. But you don't focus on the positions, you focus on the common interests. If you do interest negotiation rather than position negotiation, then you can get to some solutions. But if I try to turn him out of his position, he's like, take a hike, Russell, I'm not gonna, and I won't be able to change his mind, vice versa. But if we find the interests that we do agree on and we just operate in that space, not trying to go for the whole enchilada, but just go for that space, then you can get good bipartisan work done. And then once you nail that, then the areas of trust grow, and they grow. And what Matt and I found in our foreign travels and the many amendments in legislation, including bills we got the presidents to sign, was it widened the trust as we worked in those first interest negotiations, not trying to turn each other out of our positions. And we have to do that. We have to value the ship of state, not fight over the will. And then as it's heading to crash into the rocks, we're more worried about control. No, let's get the ship of state off of the shoals and not worry about us, and let's look at the common interests, and let's just operate there. Let's get something done. And there are people that are willing to do that. You don't hear about them, and I agree with Matt. They're not getting any headline. Why? Government function, said no one ever, right? People got along, said no one ever.
Well, speaking
right?
of dysfunction, let's talk about the southern border.
Okay.
Shall we? Because there's, one side is saying, look, Congress has to fund more border patrol, more asylum judges. The other side says president needs to use executive order and shut the border down. So what's the solution? I'll start with you, Matt.
Sure. I am proud to tell you that I work with Henry Cuellar from Laredo, Texas.
Good man.
And we are on the Border Security Task Force in the Democratic Caucus. Clearly, we're facing a surge right now, and we need to do something about it. I think that an executive order is not out of place. The problem is that you have to follow the law. Now, everybody knows we closed down the border because of COVID, and that was Section 265 of Title 42. People refer to it very loosely as Title 42, which is a huge title in the Judiciary Code, but Section 265 of Title 42 allows the president by executive order to shut down the border in the case of a pandemic or some national health emergency. And that's what President Trump did for about 10 months, and between March and the end of his term in 2020. And on average, he ejected about 50,000 people a month for those 10 months. President Biden kept that in place. He kept that closed border under Section 265 of Title 42, kept that in place for another 28 months. And there was a surge during that time. And on average, during that 28 months, we ejected an average of 100,000 people per month. So there were people running around saying, well, Biden was for open borders. That wasn't true. It ended May 11 of 2023 when the Centers for Disease Control came out and said that the pandemic is over. And
What about
because of
remain
that,
in Mexico?
That was because once that pandemic was over, it was no longer legal for the president to issue an executive order to close the border. Now, Steve and I served on the Oversight Committee with another Oklahoman, James Langford. And Langford cobbled together a compromise. And that was one that did get some press, actually.
And it passed in the Senate.
Well, it was going to pass the Senate. And then Mike Johnson announced that it was dead on arrival. There's speculation that he got a call from a person from Florida that made him do that. He denied it. He said it was his idea. But Langford worked hard on that. And Steve and I both know him. He's a principled conservative Republican. He worked with Chris Murphy from Connecticut really hard on achieving a compromise to get us off of the schneid with the border. It would legally give our current president the right to issue an executive order to close the border just because of the surge, not because of COVID or a pandemic, just because the numbers are getting overwhelming and we can't comply with the law.
But during the Trump administration, there was remain in Mexico. Can that not be reinstated?
I think it could be. The problem is that Mexico won't go along with it. And there's a lot of diplomacy involved in that.
Your comments on the border, anything quick, Steve?
So we are a sovereign nation. We have the right to protect our borders. I look at it, I was a chairman of the National Security Subcommittee and Oversight and Government Reform. There's a lot of bad things that do come across the border other than just immigrants. But I do think that you can get to something, one of my daughter-in-laws, she is a permanent resident. 3 of my own children are adopted and they came here on green cards. It's not some academic issue for me. We are a nation of immigrants. And most of us, right? That's our heritage, that's who we are. So what do we do with that? Let's find a way. If you have people that are wanting to work, then let's find the legal way, the lawful way where they can come and work. They're going to go home anyway and put money into their families south of the border. Fine, let them come and go legally. We know who they are, we know where they are. These are the types of things that we have done in the past, and we have done it lawfully. We could do it again. Why we have this sudden xenophobia, and it flips from party to party. It's not just purely Republican or purely Democrat. You look at the history of the United States, you have xenophobia that goes back and forth. But what we need to address is we got to look at immigrants in a different way. And then you got to look at 330 million souls. Can we accommodate 80,000 refugees, for example? Do we have a lottery system? We have Mr. 45 that says, that's stupid. Why would you have a lottery system? But here's the thing. Do you want only the wealthy? How do you get wealthy in a tyrannical country, right? How do you afford the $1 million to come in? And you're going to let that guy in? I'd rather have a lottery system where you have just somebody come in and has the opportunity to make good in the United States. And what we do know is that within 1 generation, maybe 2, most immigrants come in here and you're calling them doctor, and their kids are running the valedictorians in the local schools or whatever, just like in Oklahoma. I'm proud of the state of Oklahoma. They were the largest per capita recipient of Afghan refugees. California and Texas had larger numbers, but not per capita. And they did the same thing after the Vietnam War, and they've done the same thing with Chinese refugees after the Korea War, 1950, and a lot of that, and the unrest. We shouldn't be afraid of immigration. We can find ways to solve it. And there are ways to have lawful workers to be able to come in and out. Europe does it, Germany does it. We can do it.
We will take questions from you guys, so get your questions ready. I'm going to ask a few more questions while you're thinking about your questions, and that's about abortion. Matt, former President Bill Clinton said this decades ago, that abortions should be, quote, safe, legal, and rare. Kamala Harris toured an abortion clinic. It was the first time a sitting vice president has ever been to an abortion clinic. What message does that send on the rare part?
I'm not sure. I can tell you my own position is I did not run for Congress to take women's reproductive rights away from them, and I've seen them during my tenure in Congress stripped away from them by the Dobbs decision. It's bad, and it's going to be a defining issue in politics for a very long time, because you take somebody's rights away from them, something that's been in place for 50 years. Mimi, I'm Catholic, and my wife is too, and we did not choose abortion, but that doesn't mean that we're for taking women's rights away from them. That was a jarring decision, that Dobbs decision, and I was surprised and disheartened and dismayed that the Supreme Court took that pretty radical approach to changing American rights. It's something that I hope we can undo with national legislation.
Right now, it's going the opposite direction, though. We've got Florida has just imposed a 6-week ban. Most of the states in the South now have total bans on abortion. Let me get your input on that, Steve.
I'm for women's rights.
Very rare Republican.
But let me explain. The rights of women that haven't been born, who speaks up for them? Who speaks up for them? Who creates life? Is it man? Is it scientists? Who is it? Can we assemble cells to form intricate DNA chains with specific codes to decide whether to replicate or form a plant, a pig, or a person? No, we can't do that. God is the creator, not man. It is God that decides to create life. Humans don't bring human beings into being. God does. All man can do is procreate. We get to participate in life that he has designed. If then God is the creator of life, is he not also the author of its limitation? Who except the mentally deranged would believe killing a 9-month-old is acceptable under certain conditions, or a 19-year-old, or a 90-year-old? Who gets to decide that? And so we have to address these issues. It's very divisive. It has been since Roe versus Wade. The American public is deeply divided on the issue. And again, if we try to force one side out of a position, we're never going to get there. What we have to do is find the things where we do have some of those common interests, and there are some. For example, the Hyde Amendment, broad bipartisan support for that. But now we're tinkering with the Hyde Amendment that maybe you start getting tax dollars that do go to force some of those items, and that goes in direct contravention not only to the law, but people's consciences. And so why go that direction when you're only going to divide half of the Americans on it? Okay, maybe it polls 60-40 today and it's 40-60 tomorrow, but it's a deeply divided issue and has been for a long, long time.
Would you make exceptions for rape, incest, the life of the mother?
I think, the folks that would say, who deserves to live, right? That's a tough question. I'm not a woman, but I also have a heart of compassion for people that are unwanted. You can say, well, people can adopt them. Well, for me, that's not academic. I adopted 3 orphan children, 3 of my 5. Mother died of tuberculosis, dad died in prison. Can you assimilate them into your own family and love them? Yes, you can. Should we do that? Yeah, there's people out there that want to do that. You can do that. Who gets to decide? So I'm for women's rights. They just can't speak.
All right, on that, we will take your questions. We've got microphones roving. If you just put your hand up and we can get a microphone to you.
Thank you both for being here tonight. My question is for you, Representative Cartwright. As you know, since October 7th, Hamas attacked the state of Israel. Israel has killed over 30,000 Palestinians in Gaza, injured many more, and has displaced most of its 2 million plus residents. The overwhelming majority of people harmed so far have been civilians. As just one of many examples, yesterday they killed clearly marked World Central Kitchen aid workers while they were on a convoy route they had coordinated with the IDF. About a month ago, in a Facebook post you took down and Instagram post you edited sometime since yesterday to remove the city names, you compared Israel's assault to the US atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You said, in so many words, it was a necessary but difficult decision. First, why were these posts removed or edited? And second, is there any conceivable red line the state of Israel could cross to make you withdraw support for US military assistance to Israel?
Thank you for the question. I wasn't aware that anybody edited that. I actually wrote that post myself. I've written no fewer than 4 letters to the Biden administration urging humanitarian assistance, urging ways to help the people in Gaza. Obviously, they're just the vast majority of people in Gaza are innocent, non-combatant civilians, and they're being used as shields by Hamas, and it's a horrible, gut-wrenching situation, and all of us who pray should be praying for everybody in Gaza. But there were people saying, well, you must call for the unilateral permanent ceasefire by Israel in their response to the horror that happened on October 7th. You know, October 7th, when these monsters in Hamas came across the border and attacked innocent, poor farmers, unarmed civilians, attacked them, killed them, raped them, mutilated their bodies, and took about 200 of them hostage and back to Gaza. And so there were those who were calling for that kind of a ceasefire. I did not. And I don't, my own view of it was this, is that the United States was attacked, and we were, in 1948, Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel, but 3 years prior to that, he had a horrible, gut-wrenching decision to make, whether to drop those bombs on the Japanese cities, full of innocent, non-combatant, unarmed civilians, moms and dads and children. We did that. Our country did that. And even before Harry Truman authorized that, Franklin Roosevelt did it with the cities of Dresden and Hamburg. After I graduated Hamilton College in 1983, I spent the summer in Hamburg. It was the 40th anniversary of the complete firebombing of the city of Hamburg by the American and British Air Forces. We did those things, and I just felt like we're not on the high ground. We don't own that moral high ground to tell Israel exactly thus and so and how far to go in your response. I'm not saying that won't change, but that's where I am on that now. Thank you for the question.
I'd like to comment on that as well, if I might. 1,250 were killed in Israel in an immoral, cowardly act of terrorism by attacking, killing, and sexually torturing unarmed concert goers. Even if by some stretch of conscience and imagination we suppose that this was somehow a good attack, it would be equal to 45,000 people being attacked and killed in the United States in population by comparison. Imagine that, 45,000. That is the entire population of Niagara Falls. If 45,000 Americans were attacked and killed, what would our reaction be? In World War II, 2,500 were killed at Pearl Harbor, 3,000 at 9/11. Given the determination, industry, and retribution we unleashed, to Matt's point, when provoked and attacked in such a dastardly and deliberate fashion, to quote a Democrat named Roosevelt, can we not comprehend the visceral ethos of the nation of Israel to address such immoral attacks? We leveled Japanese cities. We occupied Afghanistan for 20 years. How is it that we pretend to not comprehend Israel's determination? And how is it that we pretend that Hamas has the Gazan people in their best interest? I've sat with Mr. Abbas and his administration. I've sat with Benjamin Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett. I've been to the kibbutzes on the Gazan border. This is horrific for the innocents, there's no doubt. But let's not pretend that Hamas is moral or that they have some justification for their actions. And let's not pretend that Israel is not a sovereign state and it hit them viscerally, much like it hit America. Imagine us losing Niagara Falls, every man, woman, and child in it, and not having a reaction. So let's face that reality.
Other questions?
Hi. There's a very clear disproportionality in which both of you are addressing this issue, in which Israel has killed far more civilians before October 7th than Hamas has killed on October 7th. They have been guilty of several human rights violations before so, including illegal settlements, white phosphorus gas. They've taken Palestinian prisoners without trial in their prisons, been accused and recorded of abusing their prisoners and sexually abusing them, several reports of rape as well. And and also I know, Senator Cartwright, you also co-signed a resolution concerning accusing Russia of genocide against Ukraine. And many of those grounds that you use to accuse Russia of Ukraine, Israel is committing those same things. And recently the UN also proposed that there was reasonable grounds for genocide on similar grounds in the ICJ. And Israel is also going against the ICJ's ruling to prevent genocide by continuing to obstruct aid to Gaza, as several officials and organizations have noted. So I want to know why you continue to emphasize the crimes against Israelis, civilians, which are sad, and I do not condone at all, but have never really put in the same effort to recognize Israel's crimes against Palestine that have been happening over the years and continue to happen to this day.
That was well said. You've expressed yourself well. No, I'm very upset. If I've understated how upset I am about what's happened to the innocent civilians, the unarmed non-combatants. I'm not calling for a unilateral, unconditional ceasefire. I'd like to see the hostages go back for a ceasefire, for example.
Netanyahu has also denied several deals that included the release of all hostages for a permanent ceasefire. And so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Netanyahu has denied and refused several deals that gave the release of all hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire. Because he did not want the permanent ceasefire, even if it meant the release of.
The hostages haven't been released. If they had been, that would be a basis for talk.
That's what a deal is. If you agree to it, then you release.
I don't have any understanding of what a deal might be. I've only sat with kings and presidents and ministers across the world. I've only been to 80 countries in all 50 of our United States. I don't have any clue what a deal might be. I've sat with people that are literally shelling and killing each other and not moving forward to even harvest wheat. And yet I've been able to get them down and sit them at the table and talk. And we have to do the same. And we have to do it civilly, and we have to do it morally. You can't commit crimes and use innocent people as pawns. And the stated expression of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and by law, we have laws that govern our actions against terrorist organizations. And Hamas is a terrorist organization. And it is one of the worst that the United States foreign policy has to deal with. They're disrupting a lot of things in the world right now. Now, that's not Abbas. That's not the Palestinian Authority. They were making some good ground. But when they usurped power in Gaza, they usurped it. They didn't have the Palestinians.
They committed far more crimes
Excuse
than
me.
an actual terrorist.
Excuse me, you're gonna have to raise your hand, and we're gonna have to give other people a chance. So we'll take the mic for now. We'll come back to you if we don't
You
have
diverted
any
my
other
question.
questions.
No, see, this
Not
is,
address the proportionality, and that's where I draw the.
you can get to people that want to negotiate. We were making good progress with Abbas. We were. But Hamas, a terrorist organization, usurped power and took Gaza away from the Palestinian Authority, and they governed it themselves. You can't negotiate with terrorists, and it's never been our policy to do so. So change our laws. Change our laws. If we are allowed to negotiate with terrorists, then maybe we can sit down with Hamas. But this is the United States. Israel is a sovereign nation. They got 8 or 9 million, okay, depending on how you count it, but they also have a mantra, never again. And you know what? They're a sovereign nation. They can do that. Now, we can build piers and we can drop aid by parachute and we can go in and do a lot of wonderful things to try to help people because we have compassion on them, and that's the American nature. And we do that on both sides. Why? Because that's American nature. We do have compassion for those folks. We do. But you have to understand it is a visceral thing with Israel, and they're a sovereign nation. What is America's foreign policy? We try to work with the reasonable heads that are there, and Hamas is not one of them. You have to work with legal authorities, not terrorist authorities, and you have to work with them on both sides of the issue. Hamas is not one of those sides.
Any other questions? Yes, right over here.
This is back to like the green sector. When you were talking about, you both mentioned that we can move towards more of a green sector, but it doesn't provide enough jobs yet. So what is a way that you would propose that the green sector could provide more jobs? I know, Steve, that you had mentioned that doesn't provide enough jobs currently, and that's one reason why Republicans may oppose climate change bills. What is a way that you could propose that it could provide more jobs so people may agree with it?
Yeah, I think one of the ways is we have a real opportunity to liquefy natural gas, send it to Europe. Europe's in need of a lot of natural gas. We sent technologies over for Poland and Gdansk to do liquefaction, de-liquefaction plants so that they could be less reliant and independent actually now. There's ways that we can leverage the oil and gas industry in a good way. And it goes back to the transitional period that you have to have where you keep and maintain certain jobs as they translate over. I mean, how many people are wheelwrights today? Not very many. But at one time, being a wheelwright was like one of them. What are you going to do when you graduate? Well, I'm going to be a wheelwright. Oh, that's good. There's a lot of wagons out there. Eventually, you transition to something else. In fact, most of the jobs that your generation will work haven't even been invented yet in the next 20 years. So innovation is a hallmark of American society, but we need to transition it. And to demonize fossil fuels, I mean, there's oil and gas in Pennsylvania, there's oil and gas in Oklahoma, right? And there's good ways to leverage that and use that within legal ramifications. But what you have is radical elements on each side, and they say, oh, well, it's against this and it's against that. But if you look at which is better, to use fuels, fossil fuels, gasoline and the different things, or we use natural gas, which is cleaner and burns better. There's ways to be smarter with the things that we do as we transition, and then innovation and technology moves up. And that way you preserve jobs and you transition jobs into the next sector, but you don't abruptly cut it or overtax one sector because that's people's lives. And then it goes back to that position and interest. You're going to turn them out of their position. And what are they going to do? They're going to find some tyrant that they're going to elect that'll make it stop. And then he'll get power or she'll get power or whatever it might be. And then it's bad for everybody. So you have to factor these things in as we advance forward to take care of the climate.
I'll jump in too. Thank you for the question.
Good question.
I joined that Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition Caucus the first week I was in Congress. in 2013. And I couldn't be more excited about the jobs and the economy that sustainable energy will create. The fastest growing, one of the fastest growing parts of our economy are the installation of solar panels. I mean, I think about, I have my brother, Patrick Cartwright, who was a Hamilton grad 1988, listening in on this. And I can tell you that he has a solar array that powers his house, that powers both of his cars, and he's selling energy back to the power company online. And one of the best things about renewable energy, in addition to creating more and more and more jobs, who does it help more than anybody? Really poor people. Because if you're really poor, it costs you the same amount of money and energy to run a car as a rich person. But that's a huge proportion of your annual income is what it costs you your energy bill. If all of a sudden the energy bill goes way, way, way down because it's all renewable energy and it's free, think of the benefit to the standard of living of people who are really indigent, not only in this country, but in the world.
How can you think to care about the environment and the world when you don't acknowledge the impact of climate impact Israel has had?
Sorry, you got to raise your hand, and then we'll get you a microphone. We're being recorded, so we need the streaming to hear you as well. Excuse me, can you wait until we get the microphone to you, and then I'll give you a chance to ask your question. Can you get them a microphone, please? Anybody else down here while we're getting that upstairs?
Hi, thank you for being here, number one. This has been a really interesting conversation. I was just wondering, going back to what you talked about with the House Freedom Caucus and how they're really causing a lot of problems with moving legislation forward, where do you see a solution for that on both sides of the aisle? Like, what more can Democrats be doing to help keep our government moving, and what can Republicans do to forward their party and create more unity? Because this seems to be like a real stopping point for a lot of things happening today.
Sure. What's happening right now is that the Freedom Caucus, you remember when the first thing that the Republicans had to do was elect a speaker. And they finally did elect Kevin McCarthy after 15 rounds of votes. And to gain that the number of Republican votes he needed to win the speakership, he made concessions. He made concessions in what they call the rules package. And the rules package contains all sorts of provisions about how you run the government, how you run the U.S. House. And one of the things that he agreed to was that you could, just one person could bring what we call a motion to vacate the chair. Just one person could bring that motion. And that was Representative Matt Gaetz that brought the motion to bring down Speaker McCarthy. But another thing that was in the rules package was that they demanded a certain number of Freedom Caucus members go on the Rules Committee. Now, you don't have to be a government major to know that bills that go through the House have to go through the Rules Committee before they get put on the floor. And if the Rules Committee allows a bill to come out of that committee, it can go to the floor for a vote, an up or down vote. Majority wins. 218 votes in the House, and the bill passes. But what's happened is because they have 3 Freedom Caucus members on the Rules Committee, they are effectively able to block any bill that they want, even if the only reason they want to block it is that they're mad at the current speaker. And that has been happening. And so as a result, ordinary legislation has ground to a halt. We were talking about Harry Truman before. Harry Truman had a terrible 1946 election. All kinds of Republicans got elected to Congress then, and they blocked everything he wanted to do, and he called them the Do-Nothing Congress. You know, the 1946 Congress passed about 900 bills.
That's a lot.
We have passed fewer than 50 bills in the current Congress. This is the Do-Nothing Congress on sleeping pills, not steroids.
Hello.
Are you upstairs? Okay, go ahead.
So I was just curious because I felt like there was a bit of hypocrisy in your response about climate change. Because you're addressing climate change and how it affects poor people and minority communities, not only in the United States, but in the world, but yet you fail to address how the genocide that is happening in Israel, the climate impact, the devastating climate impact that they have had by dropping bombs and white phosphorus, what that is doing to the environment. We can even talk about the genocide in Congo and what that is doing to the people there. And that is not being addressed. And so I'm wondering, how are you going to talk about climate change and ignore those major things that are changing the world and impacting the poor people you so care about?
Okay.
Well, I care about them and you care about them, and I thank you for the question. It's a really hard problem. Nobody's smiling when we talk about what's happening in Gaza. Innocent people are dying there. You know it, I know it. And the question is, what do you do about it? Do we go and tell a sovereign nation, you must do this, you must do that? That's a place we haven't been. That's a place we haven't gone. One thing we do is diplomacy. Now, who's our top diplomat in this country? It's Tony Blinken. Antony Blinken is our Secretary of State, and I've gotten to know him over the years. This is one of the most able, the most capable people I've ever met. Antony Blinken, and you know he's working on diplomacy, trying to achieve exactly what you and I both want, an end to the violence in the Middle East. Don't give up on Tony Blinken, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess I would comment. I've been on battlefields. I've had to take human life as an infantryman. I've seen the horrors of innocent people dying. I've watched friends die that I served with. None of it's pleasant. You get to that point because diplomacy fails. When sovereign states make a decision to no longer negotiate, then they will turn to force. Now, what you had in the case of the attack that Hamas did, they didn't ask the Palestinian people that live in Gaza if that was a good idea. Look what they subjected them to. Because you had a terrorist organization that decides to commit this act. They can cite all of the justices or injustices they want to, but by trying to do it that way and drawing outrage and United Nations condemnation for the crimes that they committed in that, and they still hold people against their will as hostages. When you have that, you have then a sovereign state dealing with a terrorist group. You have a sovereign entity with the Palestinian Authority that would love to enter that negotiation process, but they have no control in Gaza. So the first thing that really you have to do is, how do you get Hamas out of Gaza? They are culpable here. They are culpable here. Is it sad for all of the innocent life, both with the Israeli citizens and with the citizens of Gaza? Yeah, it's horrible, because they're just innocent people trying to do life, right? And that's never a good thing to be under. They have no control of the outcomes. But you cannot negotiate with terrorists. The stated objective, number one, of Hamas is to eliminate all of the Jewish people in the nation of Israel. How do you negotiate with that? You can't. So you have to put it in the hands back then of diplomats. You have to put it back into the hands of people that will have actual authority and use the rule of law and the rule of governance. And until you do that, you're really left with limited options.
Okay, there was another question. You've asked your question, you didn't raise your hand, but I did see a hand somewhere here. Yeah, if you can just wait for the mic, over here.
How can you claim to not be able to tell other sovereign states what to do while still majorly supporting their military efforts and using American money to do that when the majority of Americans are not in support of Israel's actions in Palestine currently? Depends
on what part of the country you live in. You know, Yeah, here in New York, maybe there is that thinking. Other parts of the country, maybe not. All I would say is you're not dealing with a sovereign state in Gaza. How many times do I have to keep stating it? You're dealing with a terrorist organization that is holding the Gazan people hostage. They are holding them hostage. And not only are they holding the Gazan people hostage, but they're holding the people that they captured in the attack on a sovereign state of Israel. Now, if you want to deal with the Palestinian Authority and you want to deal with Israel, then you can start getting somewhere. But Hamas usurped that from the Palestinian Authority and with Abbas, who was the legally elected entity there. So you want to negotiate with terrorists? The United States isn't going to do that. I just take it back to the rule of law. We are a nation that is ruled by law, and our republic is ruled that way. And it's the same way in international law. Hamas is not a sovereign state. They are a terrorist organization. And it's very important that people understand that, because you can't do a sovereign negotiation with someone who is not sovereign. They have usurped that power and control away from the Palestinian Authority. And until they're either eliminated or they acquiesce, the Gazan people sadly are going to suffer. And the United States should and is trying to get them relief. And I hope that we continue.
I want to ask, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Can I clarify my question?
You don't have a mic, nobody's in.
Talking about Israel as a sovereign state. Israel is the one who is responsible. I am not trying to call Hamas a sovereign state, to clarify.
We're going to start to wrap up.
Yeah, we've answered it. So.
We have answered that question. But I want to, I want to just wrap up with, since we were talking about finding common ground and disagreeing civilly with each other, what have you learned over, and I'm going to start with you, Matt, over the course of your professional life, over the course of your life in general, about how to disagree with people that how to be civil with people that you disagree with?
Look, it's about not being arrogant, okay? I mean, we've had some very smart young people raise their point of view, and I'm listening. I'm here to listen. And I listen to Steve Russell, and I listen to everybody. It's about not being arrogant. It's arrogant people that don't listen when people of good faith and good conscience talk to you about what they believe in.
And call for a ceasefire.
Steve.
Are you hearing us?
But what I'm here to say is this: it's humility that helps you listen to people. I don't go around quoting the Bible a lot, but my favorite part of the Bible is the book of Micah, where the prophet Micah says, what is expected of me? And the answer is to love mercy, to do justice, and to walk humbly with your God. I think that's a very, very important part of the Bible, because it's humility. Only arrogant people have a hard time listening to each other. People with humility can do it.
Well, I'll give you one. Proverbs 15:1. Soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Make your case, have passion, gather your facts, make your discourse. But shouting and again forcing people out of position is never a solution. Are we going to become the fire eaters of 1860 in South Carolina and just tear down the institutions with nothing to replace it? What a bucket of nonsense. Use discourse. Be man or woman enough to listen to opposing views and then make your case. But you don't do it by shouting, and you don't do it by incivility. You do it by being American, and you do it by standing above that. And that's what we tried to do in Congress, even though at times we didn't agree on things. But you know what? We didn't focus on the things we disagreed on. We tried to make forward movement on the things that we did. And that's what you have to do. So find the interests that you do agree on, even on something as passionate as this conflict with Israel and Gaza is horrific. But find common interest. We all want suffering to stop. We're all willing to give aid. We all want people to listen to one another. Well, those are common interests. So let's lock arms and work in that regard rather than shouting each other down, because that's how we'll make forward movement. We don't do it by incivility. I've had a lifetime of conflict, and I don't want to get anywhere near where you have to resort to shouting. What comes after shouting? castigation, elimination, extermination. I mean, what happens?
All right.
So my point exactly. Yeah, so good luck making your case. Good luck
And with
making your
that,
case doing it that way.
I will thank our guests very much, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.